Hello and welcome to Haverin About, our brand new podcast where we mix stories, strategy, and a bit of Scottish-style blethering. I am Bethany.
And I'm Stuart.
Wonderful. And we are your hosts for this very special episode. So if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, you should. They're on Apple and Spotify and YouTube and all those lovely places. But we are both healthcare technology sales professionals, and that's what we primarily talk about on this podcast. However, this is a very special episode. For those of you who don't know Stuart personally, he, in the spring of 2023, underwent a double lung transplant, which is a huge miracle of medicine. I mean, truly, and we will echo and repeat this repeatedly, I'm sure, throughout the show. We are so thankful to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, to the donor family who donated Dad's lungs that are now in him and breathing and moving and keeping him alive, and to all of the scientists and medical professionals that have come before who have pioneered this technology and finessed it and made it the wonderful, wonderful technology that it is today.
Yeah. And it's particularly appropriate that we're going to be dropping this episode to make it live around the time of October the 9th, 2025, which has been declared National Lung Transplant Awareness Day. And really, the purpose of that, aside from celebrating, number one, people who have gone through this, number two, the many, many professionals who are involved in our care, number three, the many, many people in our support network, but more importantly, the donors and the donors' family, to be respectful of them. And the purpose that the Lung Transplant Foundation announced this day was really to bring attention to the tremendous outcomes and impact that lung transplant surgery has, so that if you were ever on the fence about considering volunteering to be an organ donor, then this is your opportunity to hear a little bit about what that impact is. And actually, this is going to be a two-parter, because I have some friends that I have made during my journey. In fact, one of them I knew previously, and it just coincided that we both ended up with a lung transplant, and others I've met on my journey. So we're going to be interviewing them, and then next week we'll be really profiling their stories, so you can hear a little bit more diversity other than just Stuart droning on about his story.
Exactly. And just like we always ask you to like and comment on this, especially this very special podcast episode, please subscribe to our podcast. We have an additional call to action today, which is please register to be an organ donor. We will repeat this again throughout the podcast episode. But if you go to registerme.org, you can make sure that you're signed up. Usually when you sign up for your driver's license, you can sign up. It is a wonderful, wonderful gift that you can give even after you die. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. And we'll be putting a number of different links in, but there is a national one that is provided by the federal government to direct you for your state as to where the correct place is. But there's another fantastic organization called Donate Life, who will actually help guide, and they promote inside the various states of the United States. For our international viewers, particularly those in the UK, I'm also going to provide a link that will take you to the NHS link to ensure that you can register your intentions. In the UK, is slightly different in that there's basically a prior consent, but it still is very difficult for a lot of the hospitals to challenge that. So they rely very heavily on the register of intent that is out there. So if you intend that you do want your organs to be made available, then it really helps the hospitals by knowing that you're on that register. We'll put in the description a link that actually takes that through for our friends back in the UK.
Absolutely. So we are going to start this episode by talking a little bit about Dad's story and especially the month or two prior, as well as the, recovery and where we are now 2.5 years later. And then in the second half, we're going to talk a little bit about the impact that something like this has on the family, but also, as a health technology sales professional, what happens when you yourselves are completely pulled out of action for months? And what happens if your family member is pulled out of action and you suddenly have to step up, in so many ways, emotionally, physically, financially, and kind of the impact that makes, and a few lessons along the way. And then in our next episode, we are very blessed to have some of our new friends share their stories as well. So we really encourage you to listen to that. Again, we all work in healthcare. We know that we wake up every day and it doesn't matter what you're selling, whether it's an EHR, a clinical app, or rev cycle, or data, you are making the wheels of healthcare move and making something as frankly ridiculous as a double lung transplant actually happen. It's really remarkable. So, Dad, do you maybe want to give a not too rambly long version? Because I know there is a Substack on Dad's Haverin Substack. He gets into all the timeline and the details. If you really want to get in the weeds, we will put a link. But do you maybe want to give a Cliff Notes version of the, maybe not highlights, lowlights?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that I will try to make that as concise as possible, because I think it's important that if you do want to hear that story or read that story, it's available in the Substack. The other thing is, one of the guests that I have for next week's podcast is a lady called Jenny McFarlane. Jenny has a podcast of her own, invited as a guest to participate on her podcast, and she's on 155 episodes, all stories of people who have received a transplant. You'll hear Jenny's story next week, but she interviewed me, and I went and looked, and my episode is one of the longest she has. It's an hour and 20 minutes.
Doesn't surprise me.
You don't need to listen to an hour and 20 minutes, but again, we'll put the link there for those who would like to get a flavor of what Jenny's storytelling style is. And you'll obviously hear her story herself next week. She also was a lung transplant recipient. But in terms of the course of my disease, it was very unusual and quite short compared to a lot of people who have pulmonary or breathing problems. I started in probably, sort of like 2019. I started to, have some breathing problems, but I put it down to I was obese, I was out of condition, I wasn't looking after myself. I'd done a big effort to get fit leading up to Bethany's wedding in 2017. And then, like all of us, I fell off the wagon and started doing all the bad things again. But I put it down to that, and I thought, well, no, it's fine. Then early in 2020, yes, that period of time during the pandemic, I suddenly became more breathless than I had been. And one evening, I was in a hotel in Nashville. I'd been having a sales team meeting, and I just suddenly, it was like a wall fell on my chest. I couldn't get breath. I just couldn't breathe at all. And I ended up managing to rally myself, got myself dressed, and ended up in the emergency department at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And at first, of course, their immediate concern was, has he got COVID? Then they thought it was pulmonary embolism. But ultimately, I saw the pulmonologist, and they diagnosed that I had inflammation in the outer edges of my lung tissue, something that's called interstitial lung disease. And it's the tissue where the blood oxygen and carbon dioxide transfer happens. So that's why I was having trouble breathing, is basically my blood was screaming for oxygen, and I wasn't able to provide enough to them. So I was investigated for that. They looked at all the different reasons, and they ended up describing it as idiopathic, which is basically medical terminology for, we don't know.
Yeah. Because you've never been you've never smoked in your life.
Nope. We hadn't been exposed to anything, obviously, haven't worked in kind of hazardous environments or anything other than, sales review rooms. That's a hazardous environment. But no, seriously, no real reason as to why I would have ended up with that tissue damage. So anyway, I progressed forward. I was being treated. I was on low doses of steroids. It helped me. I got fitter, had to rely on oxygen from time to time. But on the whole, I was very fit. But in the the early days of March of 2023, I suddenly became very ill.
Yeah. Because we
Like
came
within,
to, so we drove up, we live just south of Atlanta, and we drove up to just outside Nashville where mum and dad used to live. I think like the first weekend in March or something, like very
yep.
early March, and you were like you had a cough, but you were fine.
Which wasn't unusual at that point because of,
right.
what had been going on with my lungs. But yeah.
And then it just kind of all went to crap.
In the space, yeah. And so it started with, I got a bit breathless again. And I actually went to the ED at my local Vanderbilt facility in the little town that we lived in just outside Nashville. And they admitted me because they could tell, obviously, something was going on. And they put it down as, you have a pneumonia. We can see some congestion in the imaging. You have a pneumonia, we'll treat you for the pneumonia. And then 3 days on IV antibiotics and you'll be out of here and just continue the course at home. So I was discharged, followed up with my pulmonologist, and they said, well, great, we'll see you next week. Well, by the weekend, I was going downhill very rapidly. And from the Saturday morning, I had taken Sarah, my wife, to the airport because she actually was coming down to look after our granddaughter for Bethany. And so she was already down in Atlanta, and I got home and sort of like crashed out on the sofa and started watching TV. But by the end of the Saturday afternoon, I had to go to bed, and I was on oxygen lying in bed. And my SATs, we obviously was living with a pulse oximeter, and my SATs just were going down and down. So ultimately, about 8 o'clock at night, my son said, Dad, we're all out of weapons. I'm calling the EMS. And EMS rushed me to Vanderbilt. They immediately put me on this amazing machine, which I could go on for hours about, which is called a high flow oxygen system. And the particular one was a Fisher-Paykel OptiFlow is what it's called. And it just delivers massive amounts of oxygen into your nasal cavities through a special big extra wide cannula type thing. I will put some images up and that will give you an idea of what that looks like. But the oxygen is coming through at high volume, relatively high pressure. It's heated because at that pressure, oxygen is incredibly cold, so they heat it. And they also humidify it because it's incredibly dry. So it would like destroy the cell linings of your nose, for example. So I'm on that, and that felt immediately better. And I thought, oh, good. They've got some treatment for me and we'll be good from there. And so I was admitted to medical ICU at the medical center.
And by the way, I think I was in the UK on a work trip. So I was completely away, which is why mum was in Atlanta helping with my daughter.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me any of this, which again,
we're
it goes back
family.
to, well, no, we're a great family. But it is really tricky, that sort of like, at what point do you really tell everybody? What point, if you're on a work trip, do you come home? If either you're the sick person or your loved one is the sick person. And so, yeah.
Particularly when it's not, okay, I'll just get the next 1.5 hour flight back from New York or something like that. And it involves international travel. Yeah. And I think that was our attitude was, yeah, Dad's in the hospital. He's going to be all right. We'll tell her when she gets back.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I get tons of investigations during that time, but it's obvious I'm becoming sicker and sicker. And that the steroids and antibiotics weren't cutting it. That wasn't what was going on. And on the Wednesday morning, so from the Saturday to the Wednesday morning, you get the ICU crew, the rounding crew come in, and the medical director, who I'd gotten to know reasonably well by then, of the medical ICU, was standing there, and he said, Mr. Miller, I'm terribly sorry. We are not going to be able to save your lungs. You have about 15% viable tissue left to transfer oxygen into your body. So we are going to list you for a lung transplant. Literally drop the mic.
Yeah.
Because I had no concept that was anywhere in my future.
Yeah. We were all so shocked. But he's doing better. What's going on?
Well, and I wasn't even in a position to call Sarah or any of the family at that point because I was genuinely, I was the most shell-shocked I've ever been in my life. I went in a hole. I felt very sorry for myself. I was just distraught. And I immediately started thinking, how do I tell them? What's going to happen to them? If I don't come through this, what's going to happen to them all? Because I'm the sole breadwinner for the family in terms of like Sarah and myself and Bethany's brother. And so from that perspective, I was really starting to do that. Then I kicked myself in the butt. About 4 hours later, as I said,
you had 4 hours of wallowing.
4 hours of, well, it was slightly worse than wallowing. I mean, I genuinely was in a real depressive hole. But I kicked myself in the butt and said, it's a problem. Problems can be solved.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? So I immediately dropped into, all right, how are we going to get through this? What are we going to do? What's next, etc. And I started, I became the worst Dr. Google ever in the world because I immediately started going, don't do that. It's scary. If you just go and randomly search, and feel free to do it if it's not something that's affecting you. But if you go and randomly search, lung transplant, life survivability and things, you get scary information. Yeah. And we're going to sort of disavow some of that, or at least give you context to it as we talk both in this episode and in the next one with my friends. But I immediately started to try and be scientific about it. I've got medical background. I understand some things. I can work out other things, and I can ask intelligent questions of my providers, etc. So I immediately started going through and coming up with, okay, what's the plan? What do we need to do here? Now, normally for a lung transplant, you have to do a big battery of tests and evaluations. And I mean, they cardiac cath your heart. They check out your heart from the inside to work out, is his heart up for being able to handle this if we give him a new set of lungs, et cetera, et cetera. And they want to rule out that you don't have cancer. They want to rule out everything. So I had to have the most comprehensive examination that you can ever manage. And all
you got the full MOT.
Oh, yeah, the full MOT, which I think that was very interesting because normally for patients who are being considered for a lung transplant who are not in ICU dying immediately, that can take a couple of weeks that you have to go through that process because obviously scheduling all these different, sort of interventions and diagnostics, etc. They did that in 5 days and then said, right, okay, we've got all of the data now. We need to score you. We'll discuss it at the committee, i.e. local committee in Vanderbilt. And then there will be a decision to list you. And then after you're listed, then it will come the matching process, and that can take some considerable time. At least that's what they told me at the time. And we got to the point whereby it was like, okay, my favorite clinician, physician, came in, and she basically sort of like big grin on her face and said, they approved you to be listed. So we're listing you this evening. And that was on, I think it was the Tuesday evening. Mm-hmm. So that's the week. It's
also the Tuesday of health in Nashville.
Yes.
So I was in Nashville. I'd come back from the UK, found out Dad needed a double lung transplant, had landed back home, and like the next week or something, drove up to health. And it was end of quarter, end of year for the company I was in at the time.
Let's come back to that.
Yeah,
let's come back because that, I think that understanding that context of what the family are going through is really important. And I'd like Bethany to really delve into that in a second. So to continue the story, they listed me the very next morning. So that was Wednesday evening. Mm-hmm. She comes and tells me that, Katie Ann. The very next morning, she comes in with her colleague, and they basically, this is the pulmonology team, and says, I don't want you to get your hopes up, but we think we've found a match. And I was like, wait. No, you just listed me. What do you mean you found a match? She said, don't ask, but we're pretty certain this is a good match. And I went, okay. And maybe another time, maybe next week, we can talk a little bit about the mechanics around that, because there's scoring that takes place, when you go through all those evaluations. And it had just changed nationally. Literally 10 days before they were doing this process with me, it just changed. So anyway, they tell me that they think they've found tissue, but There can be false alarms. The organs might not be suitable. There might be all kinds of challenges. But let's proceed. So later that day, Thursday evening, she comes back in and she says, okay, we've dispatched a team to Phoenix, Arizona. I mean, I'm just absolutely stunned at the speed of all of this is happening. And they literally, they use private life flight planes to go and transport organs. I'm sure you've all heard the stories of this. Mm-hmm. And they flew to Phoenix, Arizona. And sadly, my donor had passed away in a couple of hours before they were alerted. And the surgeons who did my surgery actually go and harvest the organs because they need to check them out before they bring them away, just in case there's something that's not suitable for the recipient that they're going to deal with. And they got delayed flying back. They were supposed to get back, and I was supposed to have surgery on the Friday, mm-hmm. but they got delayed because there were storms in the Midwest, on the Rockies, that meant that planes coming west couldn't get through. And so therefore they were delayed. And they eventually came through after the storms had passed and arrived late Friday night. Surgeons went home to bed. If you've been moved by today's stories, please consider becoming an organ donor. In the United States, go to organdonor.gov, and in the UK, organdonation.nhs.uk. Be someone's hero. And the next I know is Saturday morning, 4:30. Sarah is with me in the room, and suddenly my room is filled with about a dozen people pulling things out of me, shuffling me around, and I recognize it's the anesthetic team and some of the nursing staff and so on and so forth. And they're basically saying, okay, it's go time. And they whisk me over onto a gurney and wheeled me down to the operating theatre, still attached to my high flow oxygen kit and everything else, my monitors, etc. And the kind of classic thing that you see in some of the medical documentaries of high acuity surgery. And they wheeled me in there, and then the ultimate indignity, they said, could you slide over onto the table, please? They asked you to do the effort to shuffle over. And that was it. And then, the next I know is, coming around on the Sunday, I believe it was. So the surgery took place through most of Saturday. And then I was extubated about 24 hours later in the Sunday. And that's an interesting story for another day. It's a kind of weird sensation on from there. Anyway, I'll speed forward because we said we'd keep this short. I had
There's a lot of details involved in a double lung transplant.
I know. And that's why, if you want to know more, go read the article or
listen and the surgery Jenny's. Itself, like the op note of Dad's surgery is fascinating.
Yeah. And even down to the little titanium bar I have and the 8 screws, mm-hmm. I think it's like 4 feet of stainless steel wire I have in my chest to reconstruct. Because, I mean, if you're of a nervous disposition, mute for the next 30 seconds. They basically cut you through your sternum and crack you open. That's how they can get the old lungs out and the new lungs in. And then they do the lungs one at a time. So they take one out, put the new one in. They take the other one out, they put the new one in. And all the time you're attached to a life support machine called an ECMO. Very, very well known nowadays because of its use during COVID. But that machine is basically breathing and dealing with getting oxygen into your blood supply whilst they're doing all of this. So quite a lot involved. And it's, if you're really fascinated to learn more, there's plenty of information out there on the inter-Googles to be able to learn about that. But I was then back in ICU, critical care ICU now. They obviously moved from my now comfortable home in a medical ICU over because I'm post-surgery. And within another 24 hours, I was up on a main unit, the main transplant unit in 8 North in Vanderbilt. And that's where I was for the remainder of my time. And my time there was remarkably short. They get you up, standing, vertical, very quickly. You still have drains and tubes and IVs, and I had pain relief going into my spine. I had all kinds of things. So if you should know by now my love of Star Trek, it was literally like the Borg, where you're walking around with all these tubes and things plugged in. But they make you walk. And you're going to hear me say walk, 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 walk over and over again.
Yeah.
Because they drill that into you. Walk, make those lungs work, get oxygen flowing through them. And so had a fantastic experience there. But one of the things that happens when you're a patient of that acuity, and it happens to all kinds of people in the hospital, is you become a label. So I was the 60-year-old male Caucasian Bolt bilateral orthotic lung transplant, i.e. 2 lungs orthotically implanted, etc. And therefore, they assume that you're going to be average until you prove them you're not. Well, I didn't feel average. I feel better than average. And, I've always loved a challenge. Bethany and I are very similar in this respect. Show me a target. Well, I'm going to want to try and beat it. And so therefore, from that perspective, I was very determined. Now, flashback. And I told my medical team this, I would always do a word of caution. Not everybody has the trajectory that I did. Okay, there are a lot of people who struggle, who have quite big complications. Maybe the tissue doesn't quite match. I was blessed, I believe, with a really strong genetic match, because both in my recovery then and since, I have had amazing improvement in my health. And that's what's allowed me to get on. But to convince the medical team and the physio team and the OT team.
You weren't just an old man.
Correct. I had to adopt what I called the close plan. So the close was, I wanted to get home. That was the contract signing for me. And so to try and get there, had to, and it's funny, after having done the negotiation episode last week, I had to negotiate with them all. I had to find out what they wanted, and I had to tell them what I wanted, and we had to try and find somewhere to meet in the middle. And it was quite contentious, because it's like the PT was convinced I was going to end up in inpatient rehab. And I was like, nope, don't want to do that. I want to go home and sleep in my own bed. I'll come back every day and do rehab, but nope. And she said, well, I don't know about that. And I said, well, what would it take to convince you? Well, you would have to do the following. I won't tell you what the first 2 or 3 things were, because they're a little bit bodily function. But one of them was, put your own socks on. Now, think about it. They've cracked you open in the middle. I've been lying in bed in ICU for weeks now. I've lost all tone in my middle and in my legs. You lose a lot of muscle mass. Very quickly.
Yeah.
And so therefore it was, okay, show us that you can put your own socks on. I was like, okay, right. So how am I going to do this? And so with the night nurse, I got her to stand over me whilst I worked out how to put my own socks back on. And so that was one of the challenges, was convincing. But it was about finding out what they wanted, and then satisfying them and being able to sort of move things forward, and in return saying, but this is what I want. So we went through that process. I was discharged after 11 days. So that is, I'm off oxygen post the surgery, 24 hours. I'm walking within 24 hours. I'm out of the hospital and headed to home in 11 days. So that shows you what determination, or sheer bloody mindedness in my case, can do in terms of achieving a closed plan.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it's what, and again, as you said, you have been very lucky, either through divine intervention, good vibes, whatever it was, but also the medical care that you received, the work that you put in. All of those things combined have led you here 2.5 years later. Fine. You have to take your drugs every day, right? The anti-rejection drugs. You've got to go. You just had your 2.5-year checkup and you passed with flying colors. But it takes so many elements. But I do truly think that being a very stubborn salesperson and sales leader probably helped you, because you have the personality where you have that drive.
Yep.
You want to succeed. You don't just want to hit your target, you want to exceed your target. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's an innate personality trait within you that allowed you to be as successful as you are, along with all of those other factors.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll touch a little bit on this, particularly as I'm talking to some of my friends, that resilience. Resilience is a great word. And I can almost treat it as I did an article recently about Invictus, which is undefeatable, and you can find that in the Substack. But resilience is one of my favorite words, because I constantly tell people you have to build up resilience. And some of that comes from experience, of being able to overcome things. Life in sales is not straightforward. If you sail through your sales career, like constantly making quota, constantly getting promoted, constantly getting bonuses and spiffs, constantly going to President's Club, that may not be a true test. That may not be where you go. I think there's been many books written about how you learn from failure. You learn from adversity. And that's what I think instills resilience in a lot of people. So that when you are faced with a big challenge, and believe me, the alternative to having a lung transplant was, no longer being here. And so therefore, from that perspective, it was a big, big challenge. I went and faced it. I went, okay, we're going to face this down. We're going to make this work. How are we going to do it? What's the plan? How are we going to get through this? Okay, you want this, you want that. So I very much used all of those skills and experiences I've gained over, 40 years in professional life and sort of 30 years in sales to work my way through. And as I say, a reasonable amount of Scottish bloody mindedness along the way.
Well, and I think the resilience goes beyond just the patient as well. It's the whole family and friends, your personal network as well. So we'll transition a little bit now, I think, into how it impacted us.
Yeah.
Especially me, and especially through the lens of healthcare technology sales. So when Dad first got sick, like I said, we saw him in early March and he was fine. And my then, how old was she then? Like 2.5-year-old was running around, having a great time. I went to the UK, came back. Oh, Dad's in ICU. And so I had to go back it wasn't health, it was Vive in Nashville. So luckily I was there. So I drove in early. I got into Nashville at like 10 p.m., came and saw you, and he's hooked up to everything. And I've never seen...
Yeah, this is before the surgery. Yeah.
Right. This is before the surgery when he had been admitted. I had never seen Dad in that sort of a position. And it was difficult. And so went to my hotel, woke up at 5 a.m., went to go see Dad for kind of the morning rounds, and then went to Vive. And I was charming and lovely and shaking hands and talking about clothes plans and blah, blah, blah. All meanwhile, I'm like, Dad's going to find out if he's accepted into the lung transplant program this week. Like, we don't know. If he's not, he's going to die in like a week. So I was going and being all charming and lovely at Vive with that in the back of my head. At the same time, I had kind of stepped up because Mum was obviously lovingly a mess, right? So I had stepped up to handle some of the more administrative functions of the family. Things
you became my PA for like a few weeks.
So it's end of quarter, also end of year for the company that I was at. I was at Vive. I was trying to talk to Dad's company as well because he was a sales leader at the time. And it was his end of quarter and he had had to go on short-term disability. Well, what does that mean? How do we do that? How do we get the right money into the right places? What does that mean for his commission? Right? It's little things that you don't think about. And then when you're really, really sick, you can't think about because you're just trying to be alive. You're just trying to not die.
Yeah.
And so
different fight.
So I stepped up and was kind of having that fight all while doing everything else. We then came back, so I went to Vive. I then drove to my parents' house, picked up my mom, took her to see Dad. I then took her to my hotel, then went out to the Vive concert, whatever it was. I don't know what it was. I was there. I vaguely remember walking around with some of my friends. I don't know what the concert was. Came back, saw mom, took her home, went to Vanderbilt, So that was just it for like 3 days. And then came back home on the Thursday night. And that was when they said, okay, we're a go. Dad's getting surgery on the Saturday. Well, it was my daughter's Easter egg hunt at school. So I'm like, well, there's nothing I can really do if I'm there 2 hours early or not. So let's go to the Easter egg hunt. And I cried the entire East. I had sunglasses on and I'm just stood on the playground with tears and all these moms are like, you okay? Like, I know it's really sweet seeing the little 2-year-olds do Easter egg hunts. And I'm like, oh, fine, it's fine, don't worry. Total mess. But then we loaded up the car. We drove to Tennessee. We took mum in for the surgery. We weren't allowed to go in because he was in such a critical unit that it was only kind of one person at a time. So we couldn't see you. Jamie and I, my brother and I, we couldn't see you to say good luck, goodbye, whatever. We just kind of trusted that mum knew what she was doing and sent her off. And it was wild. What the funniest to me was my daughter fell asleep and in the guest room at my parents' house there, they had a crib set up for her because they are extra grandparents, very extra bougie people. And so her crib was set up right next to the bookcase where all of Dad's books are. And so we put her down for her nap and was like, okay, we'll see you later. We all go back out to wait for information about the surgery. We wake up, or she wakes up, 2 hours later. We walk in and she had pulled 3 of Dad's sales books down and was like cuddling them. And so that made me cry again. I was like, oh, my baby.
I think you took a photograph. I'll see if I can stick it in.
Yeah, it was very, very sweet. So it's an awful, awful situation to be in when your loved one is having a surgery like that. What's funny is that Friday was, because Dad's surgery was April 1st, April Fool's Day. Well, the day before is the last day of the quarter and the last day of the year for the company I was with at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, because you got a weird April 1st
weird fiscal
start.
I had one of the best quarters and the best years of my career. And so at 5:00, we had like an all sales call. We were halfway to Tennessee by then. And I remember my manager just going on about like, oh, Bethany did this deal and was so proud of her. And she got this one in, like signed the final thing today. I was still getting contracts signed while I was dealing with all of this. It literally took me until I went to President's Club in like the August or September later in the year for me to realize like, oh, I had a really good year because I didn't care. I was still getting stuff signed. I was still doing what I needed to do, but I just didn't care, which is very not normal for me or for anyone. And so that was fascinating.
If you've been moved by today's stories, please consider becoming an organ donor. In the United States, go to organdonor.gov, and in the UK, organdonation.nhs.uk. Be someone's hero.
What was interesting as well is about 2-3 weeks after Dad's surgery was hymns. So, go back, shaking hands, smiling, and a little happier this time, right? Because Dad had survived and he was doing well. He had had a little setback, but generally was doing well. And Dad had posted about it. And so all of his friends and colleagues and peers knew. So for the entirety of that hymns, people were coming up to me and being like, Bethany, and just giving me hugs. So I'd be like chatting to clients and prospects, and they would just come and be like, I just need to give you a hug. I'm so sorry. And that was so lovely and so nice. And generally I kept it together until I had a huge meeting with a big, big client where we wanted to do some big, big stuff. And it was like 1:55 p.m. or something, and the meeting was at 2. And our friend, Dad's friend, Ralph Kaiser, walks up and he starts saying the loveliest stuff about Dad. I'm going to cry. This isn't good. This is a bad podcast. He started saying the loveliest stuff about Dad. And I broke down. I just started crying. My CEO walked by and was like, oh my God, fine. It's fine. I'll get it together. and I see the client walk in and they go into the meeting room, and one of the VPs that was going to be in there with me, I was like, look, give me 5 minutes to like pull it together, get it started. I'll be in there. So Ralph says all this lovely stuff and I'm crying. I had already figured out that I shouldn't wear mascara, so at least I wasn't like raccooning myself.
Yeah.
But I walked into that meeting and for whatever reason, and I was, I knew I was off my game because I was distracted, but I was there, I was doing what I needed to do. It was one of the worst meetings of my life. It was so bad. It was just bad. And one thing that will stick with me is, the people on my team who knew what was going on, which was everyone. Everyone knew what was happening. The people that stepped in and covered for me, when they would ask a question, I'd be like, I don't know what that is. They would step and be like, oh, it's this. Bethany, let me take that question. They are the people in my head who I know are good people, who are nice people, who are not only professionally nice, but also personally nice. They knew what I was going through and they kind of stepped in and stepped up. On the flip side, there was somebody that was in that meeting that saw me again later in the year when, Dad was healthy and fine and good. And they were like, oh, that was a real crappy meeting, right? Like, you really dropped the ball. You really did a terrible job. You didn't manage that meeting. And just went off on me. And on one hand, I wanted to be like, well, my dad almost fucking died like 2 weeks before. And I was a little emotional and maybe I shouldn't have been at work, but I was. I turned up. I did what I needed to do. But is that attitude really helping anybody? But, I took the other hand and I was like, well, some meetings are just, not great. We still have a good partnership. It's all good. Smiley, smiley. So I think my advice there is if you have a employee or a teammate or a partner or anybody professionally, everyone has stuff. Everyone has stuff going on. Could be a dad having a double lung transplant. It could be trying to get pregnant. It could be a divorce.
It could be a relationship falling apart. It could be any number of
anything.
Things. You used a good word as we were talking about preparing for this, grace.
Mm-hmm.
I think showing people grace is something, particularly as you become a leader. And I don't mean just in terms of leading people who are reporting to you, but just generally adopting a leadership mantle and being a good human being, having grace and a recognition for people's challenges and how that affects their work situation, I think is so important. It's very easy to become microcritical in a moment about this or that or this behavior or that decision. But I think that trying to understand, and I get it. Some people want to be incredibly private about what's going on in their life. And I totally respect that that's the case. But I think that
even more so then you should show grace because you don't know what's happening in their life.
Well, but if you see something unusual or you see something that is distinct, then maybe pause and ask, is everything okay? I love, during my period of recovery, I became a fan. My son taught me this in terms of the times that he's been in hospital. The Price is Right in the mornings on cable TV is one of the happiest shows on earth. It's Drew Carey now as the host, obviously Bob Barker back in the days, etc. They're just so happy for people to win the prizes. They don't want people not to win. There's nothing in it for the hosts or the people who are showing off the prizes for people not to win the prizes. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't matter whether they win or they don't win, so therefore be happy that they should win. I do think Drew has one of the best things ever. Be kind to each other. Take care of your mental health. I love that he finishes I'm going to go now. Every show that way, because I think one of the things that I've learned through this experience is we all get so wrapped up in our own little ball of stuff. And I get it. In sales, quite often it is you're the lonely hunter. You're out there. You're trying to sort of like overcome challenges in your company. You're trying to overcome challenges with the client. You're trying to work out how you're going to plot your course to your quota. But at the end of the day, you're still a human being and you're part of this community, this environment. And so therefore I strongly encourage people, have a little grace for other people and try and have some awareness and just ask. Just make allowance and ask rather than assuming that somebody is just not very good or this or that or the other. Maybe the only time you have an interaction with, like that guy with Bethany. So, yeah, sorry. Small tangent, but I felt it was important to
No,
say.
well, not, and I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up this episode is we've just shared Dad's story and what happened to Dad in the spring of 2023, how that impacted us and our family. It also impacted his donor's family, obviously. He made a huge sacrifice in order for Dad to be alive today.
Yeah. And
it
other
impacts
people.
so many people in your sphere. It impacted your team that you were working with at the time. It impacted my team because I was not on my best. I was not firing on all cylinders at those conferences in the spring. But if we just show grace and if we try to be kind to one another, it goes a long way in this universe. And that's whether you're a sales leader, a salesperson, just a human being on this planet hurtling through space. The kinder that you can be and the more grace that you can show people, the better. And once again, to reiterate, a huge, huge thank you to Vanderbilt University Medical Center for saving Dad's life, for his donor's family, for that huge, huge sacrifice. All of our friends and Dad's friends and his circle, seriously, at HIMSS, seeing how many people came up to me because they knew Dad. And Dad and I always go to HIMSS together, so people always see the two of us anyway. It was so impressive to go and have all these people come up to me. We're so lucky to work in the same industry, I think, because, you don't always get to hear people say lovely things about you. I think we should say more lovely things about our peers and our friends and our coworkers, right? I'm a huge fan. If someone gets a promotion on LinkedIn, sending them a message that just kind of outlines like, I'm so proud of you. You are so dedicated to this.
Even
And I've seen how
click,
hard.
and instead of hitting the like, choose another icon. It shows that you actually took a second to think about it rather than just like, oh, I'm going through and I'm hitting that little blue thumbs up. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Think about, something, maybe doing an applause. Maybe doing a heart if you know them really well, whatever it might be.
Think about subscribing to their podcast.
Yes, that would be good. Or the Substack. Let me finish with one last thing. So about 6 months after the transplant, at 5 months after the transplant, I had set myself another goal. After I had been discharged and I finished rehab, which was about 20 sessions that I had to do, and they did 3 sessions a week, I decided I was going to set myself a goal of doing a 5K. There's a charity 5K in the town that we lived in Tennessee that happens every year. And it's a big event. A couple of thousand people participate. And I decided for the first time ever, I was going to do that 5K. And I did. And I finished the 5K, so it's 3.3 miles or whatever that is, in less than an hour. I finished it in 53 minutes. I actually paid for one of those chipped bibs, the vest thing, sort of labels that you get, so that I could get the timing official. And I was stunned because I thought maybe an hour and 10 minutes, something like that, because pretty good walking pace by then. And I still go for a walk most mornings, and I've now found a route and I do 3 miles and I'm still below 60 minutes. And I'm going to keep continuing to do that so that I can keep the resilience. I completed my test the other week. Now, the second thing I wanted to share was about a month later, I finally wrote my letter to the donor's family, which you give to the Lung Transplant Service because you don't have any direct connection with the donor. You don't know anything about them. All I knew was that they had obviously given their donation in Phoenix, Arizona. It didn't mean they were from Phoenix. They could have been from somewhere in that general geographic area, and that they were male and that they were taller than me. That was it. I knew nothing else. And so I sent off the letter, and the idea is then the donor family will receive the letter through that intermediary, the transplant service.
If they choose to receive.
If they choose to receive it, because they can say, I don't want to know anything. But if they choose to receive it, then they can decide, okay, I understand. And they can either reply or they can decide not to reply. So I hadn't heard anything at all back. And I thought, oh, well, that's never mind. And I was sat at home about 10 p.m. Sarah had gone up to bed. And I was sitting there on my iPad, just browsing through when I get a ping and I get a Facebook Messenger alert. And it's from a stranger. Okay. So I click and read it. And it was from the mother of my donor, who explained that they had received the letter, or that his wife had received the letter, but she had been so distraught in her grief that she just didn't feel that she could deal with it. She had read the letter and she was very glad to hear that how I was doing, but she just didn't feel like she could address it. And then coming to the anniversary, because this is March 31st of 2024, she had asked my donor's mother, would you reach out to him? So she thought, it's so late, I don't have time to write a letter. So she Google stalked me because I had a logo on my T-shirt that happens to be Haverin. And she had Google stalked me because it's quite an unusual word, and found me out of my Facebook profile and decided, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. So we exchanged some, words backwards and forwards, which are very private and personal. She shared that at that time she didn't want to share anymore, but she was glad that she had been in touch with me. And I said, I completely understand and respect that. And just know, and please tell his wife and his daughter that I will honor his sacrifice. In
We're both messes. It's fine.
In any way I can. And so, in a tiny way, that's why I said in the preview in the last episode, I'm here and able to share our stories and pass on the information that Bethany and I do because of the gift that he gave me.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm going to pause. And Bethany,
I will take over.
I don't know whether you or I can wrap it up, but maybe you will.
No, I know. So, our call to action. Please, if you are able to, please register to be an organ donor. It completely changes and transforms lives. That's number one. Number two, please stay healthy out there for people like Dad, because now that Dad has had this gift, we need to keep him healthy. My now 5-year-old knows when we go to Granny and Papa's house, she washes her hands anyway, but we always wash our hands. We always use hand sanitizer, and we always have a shower before we go into their house. If something falls on the floor, we don't eat it. We throw it away. We have to sanitize the tables when we go out to eat. She is so on top of it. If my 5-year-old knows that, you all should know it too. Please wash your hands. It freaks me out at HIMSS how many people go to the bathroom and then just walk out.
Yeah, you would have thought COVID taught us some things.
And being in healthcare, please, if you are able to get your flu shots, please get your flu shots. My 5-year-old was telling off a older man at CVS the other day when we went for our flu shots. The guy was like, oh, it's scary needles. And she's like, no, it's not. I'm going to protect my papa with my flu shot.
Yep.
He was, and I said, oh, her papa had a lung transplant, And he's like, oh, okay. Do you want to get my shot for me then? And she went, no, you have to get your shot for my papa. Yeah. And I was like, was that a little sassy of a 5-year-old to say to a grown-up? Maybe, but she is clinically accurate.
She's a great little advocate. Exactly. Advocate for it all. Because, I am going to be immunocompromised for the remainder of my life, however much time I've got. By the way, people think, lung transplants. There's a lot of information out there that I explained that gets a little scary when you first start Googling. And you'll see lots of statements like in Wikipedia and various other places that the average lifespan for a lung transplant recipient is 5 years. I have met people who are 26, 30 years post lung transplant. And believe me, the technology and the procedures have gotten so much better. But the drugs that I am on that maintain the kind of anti-rejection regime that I'm on mean that I am immunocompromised, that my immune system is lowered, because that's how they stop your body rejecting this foreign tissue. And so that means we're very susceptible. And there's lots of us out there that are kidney patients, people who have received kidney transplants, many of those, heart transplants, liver transplants. The number of people who are on immunosuppression is huge. So aside from protecting your loved ones who may also be fragile in one way or another, there are a lot of people out in the community that are that way. So I think Bethany's right. Please, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there about the efficacy of vaccines and whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. If you don't have a reaction to it, what you got to lose? You get an ache in the arm for a day or two. Other than that, you are protecting yourself. Please, please understand that. And yes, I know that has to be a judgment between you and your doctor, but it really does make a difference when you're comparing other people. And
Absolutely.
of course, sign up to be registered to be a donor.
Yes. So, sorry we cried so many times in this episode. Good times. Please, please leave a comment. I know this was a little bit different from a typical healthcare technology sales podcast. Next week, we are going to continue to not be a typical healthcare technology sales podcast. And we are going to be hearing from some of our friends who we've met during this journey who are also transplant recipients.
Well, it's an interesting group because we have already trailed Jenny, who has a lot of experience with her podcast of talking with and learning from other transplant recipients, not just lung transplant recipients, but all kinds. But then the other two guests, one has been involved in technology sales leadership for most of his professional career, and it was just pure coincidence. And there's a very interesting twist to his lung transplant story that we'll get into. And then the other is actually a physician, a doctor, a medical doctor, who you'll get to meet and hear from, who ended up needing a double lung transplant. So each of them are going to have very different perspectives in terms of their experiences before lung transplant as to how then the transplant process affected them.
Absolutely. So on October 9th, just take a breath and be thankful for science and medicine and all of the people involved who allow all of these lung transplants to take place. Listen out for our next episode where we're going to be meeting some of those patients. And then we're going to get back into the sales stuff. We'll talk a little bit about...
Then we'll get back to the serious stuff and business of sales and commercial and health information technology.
Yeah, we need to give a good buffer before we get into any other medical crises that either of the two of us have been through. Let's give it some time.
And with that, we'll see you on that next episode. And until then, keep Haverin.